Modern football did not lose its soul in a single moment. There was no dramatic collapse, no final whistle that signaled the end of something pure. Instead, the change crept in quietly, wrapped in professional language, justified by spreadsheets and governance meetings, until the game fans grew up loving, slowly transformed into something colder, more controlled, more predictable. And at the center of that transformation stands one UEFA rule that was sold as a necessary safeguard, but ended up reshaping football's competitive spirit at every level. And that rule is financial fair play, a regulation introduced with the promise of fairness, responsibility and sustainability, yet one that has fundamentally altered how success, ambition and hope function in the modern game. Because before financial fair play, football existed in a messy, volatile, often reckless ecosystem. But it was alive. Clubs rose and fell with speed. Ambition mattered as much as history. Risk-taking could be rewarded. And the idea that a smaller club could dream of challenging giants did not feel like fantasy, it felt like possibility. And UEFA looked at this unpredictability not as romance, but as danger, because unpredictability makes systems unstable. And instability threatens control, revenue forecasting, sponsorship security, and brand consistency. So financial fair play was introduced to stabilize the system by tying spending directly to revenue, ensuring that clubs could only invest what they earned, which sounds reasonable until you realize that revenue itself is a product of historical dominance, global exposure, and decades of accumulated success, meaning the clubs already at the top were handed a permanent advantage, and that the bridge behind them was quietly lifted. Because how does a club increase revenue without success? And how does it achieve success without investment? Creating a loop that traps ambitious clubs in permanent inferiority, while allowing elite clubs to operate under the illusion of fairness. And this is where the rule began to quietly rewrite football's hierarchy. Because it didn't stop spending. It didn't reduce financial gaps. It simply made sure the same clubs could spend more forever. And once this mechanism was locked in, competition began to change its shape. Leagues became more predictable. Champions League qualification became routine for certain clubs, and surprises became anomalies rather than threats. And while fans were told this was the price of stability, what they were actually witnessing was the institutionalization of inequality, where the idea of a level playing field was replaced by a managed ecosystem designed to protect football's biggest assets. And enforcement revealed this truth even more clearly. Because when smaller or mid-sized clubs breached financial fair play regulations, punishments were swift and visible. Transfer bans, squad restrictions, European exclusions, public humiliation. Yet when elite clubs breached the same rules, consequences were negotiated quietly. Fines were absorbed like minor expenses. Sponsorship structures were redefined, and settlements were reached that changed nothing, structurally reinforcing the message that rules exist differently, depending on who you are. And over time, this double standard eroded trust because fans are not blind. They understand when fairness is selective, and as that trust faded, so did emotional investment. Because football thrives on belief that effort matters, belief that the future is unwritten, belief that anything can happen. And financial fair play slowly chipped away at that belief by making outcomes increasingly logical. And logic is the enemy of magic. And the Champions League, once the ultimate stage for chaos and romance, became the clearest example of this transformation. Because what was once a tournament defined by shocks, underdogs, and stories that transcended budgets, gradually turned into a familiar procession of elite brands, where the same clubs dominate the latter stages, the same matchups repeat, and qualification feels like entitlement rather than achievement. And when underdogs do emerge, they are celebrated precisely because they are so rare, treated as miracles rather than signs of a healthy system. And this rarity is not accidental, it is engineered. Because financial fair play does not prevent reckless spending. It prevents disruptive ambition, the kind that threatens existing power structures. And when clubs attempt to challenge the hierarchy through innovative ownership models, aggressive rebuilding, or bold financial risk, they are immediately scrutinized, restricted, and disciplined, not because they are dangerous to football, but because they are dangerous to predictability, and predictability is what modern football's commercial ecosystem depends on. Because broadcasters want guaranteed global audiences, sponsors want stable brand associations, and governing bodies want controlled growth. And the irony is that despite all of this regulation, football has not become financially safer. Debts have not vanished, they have concentrated. Transfer fees have not stabilized. They have inflated beyond imagination. Wages have not become sustainable, they have exploded. And the gap between the elite and the rest has grown wider than ever. Exposing financial fair play is a rule that succeeded, not in its stated mission, but in its unstated one, preserving dominance. And this preservation has reshaped club behavior at a cultural level. Because clubs no longer build teams with daring visions. They build them within compliance frameworks. Managers are hired not just for tactical brilliance, but for their ability to operate within financial constraints. Youth development is often less about nurturing local identity, and more about creating resale assets. And players themselves grow up in an environment where they are treated as financial instruments first, and footballers second, and this shift filters down to the fan experience. Because ticket prices rise to support revenue targets. Kick-off times change to satisfy global markets. Stadiums become sanitized spaces, designed for consumption rather than expression. And the raw connection between club and community weakens, replaced by global branding strategies that prioritize reach over roots. And fans feel this even if they can't articulate it. They feel that loyalty has become one-directional. That passion is moneized but rarely respected. And when they complain that modern football feels hollow, that something essential has been lost, they are responding to a system that values stability over spirit, safety over surprise, and regulation over rebellion, and perhaps the most damaging consequence of financial fair play is psychological, because it changed how clubs, players, and fans imagine the future. Clubs no longer dream of breaking through. They dream of maintaining status. Fans no longer hope for miracles. They hope for qualification. And ambition is reframed not as chasing greatness, but as avoiding failure, and this is a profound shift. Because football's greatest moments have always come from excess, from risk, from defiance, from individuals and teams refusing to accept their place in the order. And when a rule quietly discourages that defiance, it does not just change competition, it changes culture. And UEFA continues to defend financial fair play as a necessary evil, arguing that without it football would descend into chaos. Yet football has always lived in chaos. Its beauty lies in its unpredictability. Its stories are born from imbalance, not equilibrium. And what modern football lost was not professionalism or structure, but innocence, the belief that the game belonged equally to dreamers and giants, that history could be rewritten quickly, that tomorrow could defy today. And this is why this UEFA rule did not ruin football loudly. It did not arrive with scandal or outrage. It arrived quietly through regulations, amendments, and compliance reports, until fans found themselves watching the most polished global, technologically advanced version of football ever created, while feeling less emotionally connected than ever before. And the most uncomfortable truth is that reversing this damage is nearly impossible, because once dominance is stabilized, it becomes self-defending, and once fans normalize predictability, rebellion becomes nostalgia. And so the real question is not whether financial fair play quietly ruined modern football, but whether modern football still remembers what it was supposed to protect in the first place. And as this new reality settled in, football did not suddenly become unwatchable. It became efficient, streamlined, optimized. And that is precisely why the damage went unnoticed for so long. Because fans were still given spectacle, still given goals, still given stars. But spectacle without jeopardy is entertainment, not sport. And UEFA's financial fair play helped engineer an environment where risk was minimized, not just financially but competitively. Because when clubs are conditioned to operate within strict financial corridors tied to historic revenue, they begin to plan seasons not around glory but around security. And this subtle shift reshaped priorities across Europe, where finishing fourth quietly became more valuable than daring to finish first, where qualification bonuses outweighed title ambitions, and where survival within the elite circle mattered more than challenging its hierarchy. And over time, this mindset infected everything from boardroom decisions to tactical conservatism on the pitch. because when failure carries financial punishment, rather than sporting consequence alone, fear replaces courage, and fear is toxic to creativity. And this is why modern football often feels rigid, overly structured, obsessed with systems rather than spontaneity, because the margins for error have been financialized. And players feel it, managers feel it, clubs feel it even if they never say it out loud. And while UEFA insists that this environment protects the game from reckless collapse, it ignores the fact that football's greatest innovations were born from recklessness, from clubs gambling on unproven managers, from tactical revolutions that looked foolish until they worked, from youth projects that took years to mature, and from ownership risks that accelerated growth rather than stifling it. And financial fair play has made patience a luxury, and boldness a liability, because growth must now be linear, predictable, and compliant. And when growth becomes regulated, imagination shrinks. And this shrinkage has consequences far beyond Europe's top leagues, because the global football ecosystem mirrors UEFA's priorities. Smaller leagues become feeder systems rather than competitors. Talent pathways are designed to serve elite clubs, rather than empower local identities. And young players are commodified earlier than ever, valued, traded, and discarded according to market logic rather than sporting need. And this commodification is not accidental. It is a byproduct of a system where financial efficiency is prized above emotional connection. And nowhere is this more visible than in the way clubs now treat supporters, because fans are no longer participants in a shared dream. They are consumers in a global marketplace segmented by region, spending power, and digital engagement. And while clubs speak endlessly about heritage and tradition, their actions reveal priorities shaped by revenue optimization, pre-season tours in distant continents, kick-off times that ignore local culture, ticket pricing strategies that favor tourists over loyal locals, and stadium redesigns that maximize hospitality revenue at the expense of atmosphere. And these choices are justified by the same logic that underpins financial fair play, the logic that revenue stability equals football health, even when that stability comes at the cost of identity. And fans sense this contradiction. They feel increasingly disconnected from clubs that speak their language only when it is profitable to do so. And this emotional distance feeds cynicism, because when fans feel powerless, when they feel the game is no longer shaped by passion but by policy, they disengage, not through protest alone but through apathy. And apathy is far more dangerous to football than outrage, because outrage still cares, and as apathy spreads, football risks becoming background noise rather than obsession, a product consumed rather than a culture lived. And UEFA's response to this growing dissatisfaction has been cosmetic, rather than structural tweaks to competition formats. Expanded tournaments, more matches, more narratives, more content, all designed to increase revenue streams, without addressing the underlying issue, which is that the system itself has reduced the emotional stakes of competition. Because when everyone understands who is supposed to win, drama feels manufactured rather than organic. And even moments of brilliant struggle to resonate as deeply, when fans subconsciously believe they are watching outcomes shaped by structure rather than chance. And this belief has profound implications for the future of football, because younger generations are growing up in a game where loyalty is optional, where clubs are brands rather than communities, where players change teams frequently without stigma, and where success is framed as personal rather than collective. And while some argue this is simply evolution, evolution implies adaptation to survive, not transformation into something unrecognizable. And the danger is that football may survive financially, while eroding culturally, becoming a polished entertainment industry, rather than a social phenomenon. And financial fair play, intentionally or not, has accelerated this transformation by prioritizing order over emotion, hierarchy over hope, and control over chaos. The most revealing aspect of this rule is not what it restricts, but what it normalizes, because once fans accept that spending must match revenue, they implicitly accept that historic advantage should determine future success. And once that acceptance settles in, inequality becomes invisible. Reframed is natural rather than constructed. And this normalization is powerful, because it shifts blame away from governing bodies